Okay, so since we're a national group here, I guess I'll say both good morning and good afternoon. I'm Lisa Parles. I'm a board member of the National Council on Severe Autism and also a partner at the New Jersey law firm Parles and Rekem. Welcome to another one of the National Council on Severe Autism COVID-19 Share and Care webinars. This is the 5th webinar that NCSA has done since the COVID-19 crisis began. This webinar, along with all the other previous webinars, are available on NCSA's website, which let me give that to you. That is ncsautism.org. So after today, this will be up there along with the other 4. If you're not a member of NCSA mailing list, you can also go on the website and sign up for that as well. And don't forget to like us also on Facebook and on Twitter. There's a lot of really good information, not just on COVID-19, but on all the other work that we do. Okay, I see it looks like there's a number of people joining on. Okay, so today's topic is accessing educational services during the COVID-19 crisis. It's my pleasure to introduce 2 of my colleagues from Parles Rekem, Denise Rekem, my law partner, and Judith Weinstock, one of our counsel in our firms. Just in the way of format today, we'll have the slides for about 40 minutes, 40 minutes, and then we're going to turn over to question mode, and you'll be able to post a question in the question bar, and I'll read the questions out to the presenters. Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn the program over to Judith and ask her to get started. Judith?
Hi, thanks, Lisa. I'm really pleased to be here and we all hope that this webinar is useful for all of you and helpful during these times. I think we need to put the slides up. I don't see it. Let's see. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I don't see them either.
My apologies. I'm fixing it.
We'll have the slides up in a minute. Oh, there we are. And hopefully you're able to see the slides as well. Okay, so just to give you a little background, we just wanted to go over a few of the laws that provide the rights to children with disabilities. So there are federal laws that grant rights to children with disabilities. Some of you probably, or most of you already know this, but the 2 laws are Section 504, the Rehabilitation Act, which is a civil rights law for the disabled, and the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which is also called, we call it IDEA. And those are 2 federal statutes that provide the guarantees to access to education. Although the Rehabilitation Act is a broader statute, we use it to enforce equal access to education for children with disabilities. States also have their own laws to implement these rights. New Jersey has our state law. Many other states have their own laws implementing the requirements of the federal law. There's also case law, both state and federal law, that elaborate on these rights, define them, and apply them to particular circumstances. Next slide, please. The IDEA's mandate entitles all children who meet the definition of a child with a disability to receive a free, appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. Next slide, please. So that's the background. And then the question is, does FAPE apply during these very trying times and the COVID-19 crisis? And well, the Department of Education, the United States Department of Education, put out a guidance in March 2020. It's a federal special education guidance. And what they provided was that, yes, school districts must ensure that students with disabilities are provided FAPE. Under these circumstances, however, taking that into consideration that school districts are closing their buildings, they also provide sort of a new standard or a new phrase, which is called to the greatest extent possible. So school districts are still required to ensure that children with disabilities are provided FAPE to the greatest extent possible in consideration of the circumstances that we're faced with the COVID-19 crisis. FAPE is at minimum the special education and related services identified in your student's IEP developed under IDEA or a plan developed under Section 504. As long as the schools are open to general education students, which in this circumstances, like I said, many school districts across the country, the buildings are closed, but they're offering instruction and services via remote learning, computer technology, video conferencing. As long as they are providing that to their general education students, students with disabilities must be provided IEP services to the greatest extent possible. Next slide, please. Once school buildings reopen, the guidance also provides that the IEP team will need to determine whether compensatory services are needed to ensure FAPE. And just to go back a little bit, compensatory education or compensatory services are provided when students do not make meaningful progress towards their goals and objectives in their IEPs. So basically, this can happen now or at any time if the services are insufficient or they're not provided well or they're not provided at all. But in this circumstances, what the government's recognizing is that because the instruction and the related services are going to be provided, if they can at all, through other means other than being in person, that there may be issues concerning that children are not making progress towards their goals, or in some cases, it may even mean that children are regressing. And therefore, they are acknowledging that the teams, once the children go back into the school building, need to assess and figure out whether a child has regressed, has not made meaningful progress, and then to provide compensatory services to put them in a place that they would have been if the services in their IEPs were provided to them in the manner in which they're supposed to be provided throughout the time of the COVID-19 crisis. Next slide, please. The other thing that the guidance really acknowledges is that things should proceed to the greatest extent possible. So if you have a child who is going into kindergarten, for example, initial referrals for special education may still be made. And you should provide the early intervention evaluations to the district for them to review. And also some testing may be required. Some of the testing may have to be delayed because they have to be done in person. However, some testing can be done through telephone or video conference, and that testing can be provided and you can proceed with that testing with your consent. If the IEP is delayed, this may require compensatory education at the time that the children return to school. Next slide. In addition, IEP annual review meetings should proceed as normally, as best as possible, via teleconference, as long as the parents or the guardians of the disabled children consent to the teleconference. They should be crafted to reflect, this is very important, a school-based program, not distance learning. You want to keep the IEP intact. You want the integrity of the IEP to be based on a school-based program, because that is the program that you will be returning to. You don't want it to reflect distance learning. The IEP will be used to determine compensatory education once the children are back in the school building. So that's another reason why it's very important. And if there's any challenge, if there's any change that the district proposes or any changes that are proposed to the IEP, and you would like to challenge that through filing a petition for due process, there's something called a stay put provision, which triggers that the original IEP is the one that is in place and enforced during the period of resolution to determine whether the due process to follow through with the due process petition. So in the midst of disagreement over which IEP is applicable, it's the original IEP that stays in place or stays put. Next slide, please. Now, of course, also acknowledging the fact that this is a really difficult time and that some services may not be able to be provided that are included in the IEP remotely. you know, they may not be able to be provided at all. They may be modified. A temporary plan may be helpful to accommodate these extenuating circumstances. And this can be developed by the case manager and the team with the parent, with collaboration and with creativity to really, to the greatest extent possible, to meet the individual needs of the child during this crisis and not being able to be in the school getting person-to-person instruction or related services. We really want to emphasize to not modify the IEP, to not change the goals or objectives that are in the IEP, but rather to put a plan in place, temporary, to the greatest extent possible, to provide the services that are in the IEP with an eye towards working towards those goals and objectives. Next slide, please. And this is going back, I just want to say one more thing about the temporary plan. You know, an example would be if a child is receiving, you know, 3 times a week speech language therapy for half an hour. This should be, to the greatest extent possible, mimicked through remote learning. So, you know, the case manager should provide or can provide a schedule of services so that it's structured and the child follows the schedule of services as closely as possible, mimicking what's in the IEP already. And then as for compensatory education, at this point, you should be requesting services that are in the IEP that can be provided remotely, and raise concerns about how they're provided or what services are provided, and document them to preserve the compensatory education claims. It's critical to keep data on progress and or regression of your child's skills as best you can. We don't want to stress you out, so it can be just noticing something, noticing that they're not engaged, you know, with computer learning at all. So shooting off an email to the case manager, just updating them on how your child is doing. And that's so that you have a record and so that there'll be an accurate assessment of the need for compensatory education when the students return to school. And I'll turn this over to Denise for the next slide.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here with all of you. Clearly, school districts are proceeding with this situation in many different ways across states, as well as even within states. We see the districts across New Jersey here offering all sorts of different programming, from just posting assignments on Google Classroom to full out video learning with students. One thing that has come up that is very important is equity in access, meaning that you know, most families don't have a computer for every child in the family. Maybe there's one computer for the whole family. Maybe the computers are being used by the parents for working. And so the districts have been getting grants and trying to hand out Chromebooks to all the students who need them, as well as some of the cable companies here. And you can check in your own state if this is the same, but there are some local cable companies that are offering free access or very low cost access for students that are out of school, so that they can engage in online learning to the extent that it's being provided. On top of that, with the children that we're really talking about here on this webinar, children with severe autism may not be able to take advantage of some, if not all, of remote learning, due to the limitations that type of learning presents, sitting in front of a computer and having to engage in the computer, not having an aid to help the attention, and also just the parents being able to help the child access that learning. So, you know, it circles back to what Judy was talking about for compensatory education, but you know, everyone's doing the best they can. I think the school districts are trying. Nobody had a plan for this on the shelf. I mean, this is like so far out of what any one of us, I think, or could have thought of would happen, that they weren't really prepared for this. And I think that the collaboration with the school district, reaching out, letting the case manager know what your needs are, what your struggles are, and also having some patience and understanding for what teachers, what educators are going through right now in trying to put these plans together, while also working from home with their own children and their own childcare needs. I think we all need to come together to, help the students as much as we can now, and then we'll have to come back to compensatory education later to the extent that students just aren't able to access these services. So next slide, please. Okay, so as I was saying before, some of the services can be provided through telehealth, including ABA, speech, OT, even some PT services if the PT is on the screen explaining what needs to be done. And that is being made available in some states. Here in New Jersey, we had an issue at the beginning of this crisis because New Jersey school districts were not permitted to provide these services via telehealth. So on April 1st, the Department of Education changed the rule. It's been updated in our code to allow these services while students are home on remote learning because of the crisis. You should definitely look into your own state and if these things are available to find out if your school district is making it available, if you have the technology you need in order to access it, in order to allow your student to participate if possible. Next slide, please. Okay. So we wanted to mention the issue of waivers because this has become sort of a hot topic here in New Jersey. There are different types of waivers that we're seeing, but we want to make sure everyone understands that districts should not be conditioning receipt of services on parental waivers of IDEA rights. So, it shouldn't say that there shouldn't be a waiver that you're signing that says that in order to get the 3 speech and language services via tele services, that you're waiving any kind of rights, that you're not agreeing that this is.
Could you repeat that just because unfortunately the audio went out for a minute. Can you just repeat the last few sentences?
Oh, sure, absolutely. Absolutely, sorry. So waivers, we've been seeing some school districts here in New Jersey trying to condition receipt of services from a student's IEP on the parent waiving rights that they would otherwise have under the IDEA. The biggest one, which obviously we are trying to warn against, is that if your child gets 3 speech and languages in their IEP, the school district shouldn't say to you, well, we'll give you those 3 speech and languages, but you have to agree that afterwards we've done what we're supposed to do, and your student will not be entitled to compensatory education. That is not okay and not allowed. And I mean, it's not about the districts giving the service, it's about the progress that the student made. So it may be in some cases for some children that receipt of services is sufficient and they make progress because they're able to engage in the services and get benefit. It also may be that the district, did everything they were supposed to and gave the service, but the student just couldn't really engage in it and it wasn't that productive and they didn't make meaningful progress and they need compensatory education. A lot of times this idea of compensatory education is like meaning that the school did something wrong and now they owe the student something because they did something wrong. But in this case, it's really not about the school doing anything wrong. It's about the unprecedented crisis that everyone's going to do the best they can to provide these services. But the point of the IEP is that the student makes this meaningful progress. And if they didn't make the progress, they need compensatory services once schools are reopened so that they can make the progress that they need to make. So you should absolutely not be signing any waivers of compensatory education. There are also some waivers that are blanket waivers of any or all claims that you may have. This is inappropriate, and I would, I would recommend that if you see something like that, you call your local Department of Education, or if there's a special education ombudsman in your state, and you ask them to intervene on your behalf, because that's not right. I mean, I would argue it may not be enforceable anyway, even if you sign it, but certainly you should sign these types of waivers in order to get your child the services they're entitled to. One other thing I wanted to mention is, if your child has group speech lessons, there may be you may be helping your child on your end, and say there's 2 other students in the group, and those parents are helping their child, and maybe there's another sibling that walks into the room. And so in this online environment, as we, you can see the 3 of us. If people walked in the room, they'd see the screen also. There may be where the districts want you to, acknowledge that you understand that they are not in control of who at some other student's family may see your child, if that's a violation of your child's privacy. If you feel uncomfortable with that, you can certainly reach out and talk to your case manager and say that you feel uncomfortable. You can ask if it's possible for one-on-one services. And some of these things are also going to depend on if they have the individuals to provide the services. But we just wanted to point out that that is a legitimate issue, that the district obviously can't control who in the other person's house may see the screen and your child on the screen, and then know that your child is getting speech services, which are otherwise private information. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is actually another issue that we believe is going to have to be looked at by the departments of education in the states. In general, you have children that are in community-based instruction transition programs that are going to the supermarket and going to the community, having jobs, that can't happen right now. It just can't. It can't be replicated in a meaningful way on any kind of home instruction. So to the extent that these students miss several months of this type of instruction, that compensatory education may really be pushing the graduation out by that amount of months to allow the student to have those experiences. And that's really going to be a larger issue than your own, just your child, because all the students in this type of program would be experiencing the same situation. And hopefully the departments of education will come back with a guidance, that says that they will push out graduation by 2 months, 3 months, whatever the end is, in order for the students to then be able to get these experiences that they need from their IEPs. Next slide. Next slide. Okay. So there are some procedural issues that we're still working out or waiting for guidance on. One is timelines. There are certain timelines that, for things to have to be done by reevaluations, assessments, and we haven't really gotten the guidance on how that's going to be treated. Judy spoke about initial assessments. There's also the reevaluation assessments every 3 years. Again, some of that can be done remotely, potentially with parental consent, but in-person testing just can't be done right now, and that will need to be postponed until buildings reopen. Mediation and due process can still be filed during this crisis regarding FAPE violations. Being handled differently through a video conference. Things are somewhat slowed down right now, but you do still have those rights, and you can still file if you need to file to maintain your rights. Or if an IEP meeting is held, let's say, and you get a new IEP and you don't agree with that IEP, you have 15 days until the new IEP goes into effect, and it is not at all clear that that 15 days would be extended. So we still need to operate under the law and file for due process to invoke stay put in the old IEP. Next slide. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Lisa.
Okay, thanks, Denise. I know we had a little bit of signal problems there, so just want to remind everyone that we are going to save some time for questions. So if there were topics that Denise was covering that you want a little more clarification on, feel free to post that. I think I agree with Denise and Judy in that this has been a evolving scenario almost on a daily basis in terms of trying to come up with solutions in circumstances that perhaps none of us may have imagined. And it's particularly challenging for individuals with severe autism, particularly the population that has cognitive deficits, limited language, and behaviors that could interfere. So you may have a circumstance where the district is offering things that is just not going to be possible. In fact, could even be potentially dangerous. I mean, I know I'm getting calls from clients who, when the district is either sending information or suggesting an online interaction, that the behaviors have really escalated because of it. So in those circumstances, we again are telling clients to document it, to share that information with the case managers from the school district, because it could be ineffective if the person is not paying attention or can't pay attention. And in some cases, if it provokes behaviors, then of course we don't want to ever say to the parent that they are, responsible to do this. We also have this issue of during this period of time that your focus may be, as many of our families face a situation where they really have to think about keeping everyone safe. So just addressing the severe and challenging behaviors really have to take precedent over working on skill acquisition. And we're hoping that it will, be able to be addressed for in the compensatory education situations. Okay, I think my slide did just change before I asked, but I'm ready for that. Okay, right, thank you. Back to the behavior intervention. Particularly with behavior intervention plans, because there are some behavior intervention plans that could take two people. So perhaps somebody that's given the instruction and another instructor is doing the prompting, it's literally impossible for the parent to step in and do that. So I just, want to just make sure that you're aware that you absolutely have the right to say, this isn't working. And we will, of course, would be arguing that that can't be in any way cutting off your right to do some compensatory education when we come back. And I think that in the area of using, particularly with some behavior intervention plans, that's very relevant. Okay, next slide, please. So some states have other resources that provide not only instruction, but supports for both the family or the individual with autism. And they're funded through a variety of mechanisms. And when things are running well, we're often able to tap that. So someone may be getting through IDEA, be getting their services through the school district, but we're supplementing with some in-home services that could either be from some state funds or Medicaid funded or in private insurance funded under the autism mandate. We also have other possibilities for when someone's behavior or the family situation makes it impossible for the individual to remain at home. And in typical times, we would ask families to look at the option, of course, would assist them at looking at things like emergency placements or in some cases, even hospitalizations. That said, I think we all have to recognize how for this population in particular, times are trying for everyone. They are almost unimaginable for many of our families whose loved ones have severe autism, because accessing those services is like climbing a mountain range. In normal circumstances, accomplishing it now is very difficult. So I do just want to mention those so people think of them as resources, but acknowledge that it is very hard right now to access it. We have families that have wonderful budgets, home services complementing the educational services for in-home ABA, but the providers no longer able to find people to actually give the service. So there are possible resources, but we do know that they're hard to come by. Next slide. I also want to mention this. This is, I think, commonly a common misperception is that under IDEA, there is provisions for residential placements. Now, we often find, and I've seen this in New York, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey, where when there are other resources for a residential placement, so a residential school, that the school district will say to the family, oh, go to the state, go to this agency, go to whatever your agency might be in your state. In ours, it's called the Children's System of Care through Perform Care. Not realizing that you could be qualifying for a residential placement under all the guidelines. So maybe for an acute placement under insurance, under your state emergency statutes that allow for placements with state or even a combination of state Medicaid. But don't forget that IDEA also recognizes this. And there's a case, which I have mentioned down there at the bottom, is the Third Circuit case, the Cruel case, still good law, that talks about residential placement in some cases are necessary in order for the child to make meaningful progress. And in that case, the school district argued that these really sound more like concerns of the parents or things that are not related directly to educational goals. And the court and many courts since then have found that if the student needs that 24/7 in order to make progress, so if behaviors are interfering or a failure to generalize makes it difficult to acquire skills with just offered services during school, it may be possible that you may have that as another avenue. Again, with the caveat that right now it is somewhat difficult because finding an expert to support you might be very challenging. And in addition to that, some of the residential programs have actually closed admissions at this time. But I do want to mention it because it's families are frequently sent elsewhere when their children may in fact meet that IDEA requirement. Okay, I think next slide is probably going to send you back to Denise. Right. Okay, Denise, you want to talk a little bit about some advocacy?
Yeah, so next slide, please. Okay, so we just wanted to mention that the federal bailout, the CARES Act, that was just passed by Congress, allowed Betsy DeVos, the education secretary, to request waivers to federal requirements for education. There was pushback at that point, and it said that while she could request the waiver, she couldn't grant the waivers. Congress would still have to grant the waivers. So she is going to be writing to Congress to request certain waivers. No IDEA waivers can be granted without approval from Congress. There have been many organizations, including CCD, which is the Consortium for Citizens with Disabilities, which is an umbrella group for about 70 different organizations, that wrote a letter on April 3rd to Betsy DeVos opposing any waivers to IDEA or the Rehabilitation Act. The letter argued that IDEA is in itself already flexible, and that districts and parents are working together, and that these are the students' rights and the district should not have them waived, and that this Department of Education is already put out guidance that covers this with compensatory education. She hasn't made her recommendation yet to Congress, but we're expecting that to come any day now. So once that comes, if she does recommend any kind of waivers, we would recommend that you oppose it, write to your own state Congress people, Senator, to oppose any waivers of the IDEA or the Rehabilitation Act. It's important for you to connect with your state educational advocates who will be up to date on any issues that they're seeing in their states as we are in New Jersey. I was going to recommend that you follow, obviously, NCSA, because they are going to be putting out notifications of updates that are happening. There's another organization called Together for Choice that has been very much in the forefront of posting information for calls for advocacy. And then we post on our Parles Rekem Facebook page almost daily now, really, any updates that we're seeing concerning special education, as well as adult service issues. So I think we're back to questions now.
Okay. So one of our, let me just say this because I saw that some people joined a little late. You can post questions, and I'll now pose them for the presenters. And also to that, just remind you that if you're not a member of the National Council for Severe Autism, that you like them on Facebook, because they're always posting information with respect to advocacy efforts. Someone posted, I'd like to know, can you send us a letter example to send to our state legislatures with the important topics? So definitely with respect to the Betsy DeVos, when Betsy DeVos comes out, hopefully, we're hoping that we don't have to respond back to it, but if there is anything that eliminates some rights, then we, of course, will be posting sample letters for people to be able to send to make their legislators aware that these rights really shouldn't be curtailed. And we may have to be creative, and we may be doing things differently than we've done before, but we have to work together collaboratively to make sure that students don't lose important skills. The other thing I wanted to mention too was that, I think Denise, your signal went out a little bit, so I just want to cover that. In terms of the state advocacy, now, we're very blessed in New Jersey. We have an organization called Autism New Jersey that does a really good job in terms of staying on top of not only legislation, but in these times where almost on a daily basis we're seeing rules and regs come out, making sure that this population is thought of. So I don't know what you have in your states. We do, again, at NCSA, when we see interesting things come out of states, do post it on the Facebook page and share it. But sometimes there's things that we may not even have thought of. So one example was that for our in-state residential program, so students that attend school on a campus setting where there's a residential program, that when our stay-at-home order went into effect, people that were driving during the hours that they weren't allowed to, so it was between 8 p.m. and 5 a.m., you weren't permitted to drive on the streets. People were being stopped, so we had to immediately come up with a letter with the governor sign that said this person is an essential worker, so they're permitted to be on the roads. And each time the issue about what is an essential workers come up, we wanted to make sure that direct support professionals or home therapists were included in those definitions. Okay, just seeing. So 1 second. And then maybe Denise or Judy, you could answer the question in terms of how to document that a intervention or the instruction that the district is suggesting is not appropriate or isn't working. That we're hearing from parents that there's so many things online that look very exciting, free streaming opera, but it really may not be all that helpful to this population. So, which in our practice, we've had a lot of families express a lot of frustration to just see that a lot of those free services are not particularly helpful. But if it is a situation where the district does offer remote instruction, what would a family do in order to essentially document that situation? So maybe Denise, you want to try to take that, or? Sure.
So, we first of all, we just recommend, shooting an email to the case manager and maybe that provider as well. Unfortunately, my child was, had a really hard time with this. They weren't able to pay attention. They only paid attention for the first 15 minutes and wandered off. What should we try? Some of it you can be documenting and also trying to problem solve. So, I would say if there's something that you think could be done, maybe shorter lessons, more lessons, but for a shorter period of time, things that you're, if you have suggestions, if there are things that you can think of at least to allow the child to access it better, but just a quick email saying that, unfortunately, it really didn't get anything out of this, or I see this, my child is falling behind, or my child is having more behaviors during this, and I'm not sure how we can continue. Just documenting what's going on with an email is sufficient, really.
And if they can't engage in that manner where they're not able to sit in front of the computer, noting it in an email, and even maybe sometimes, taking your camera out and video, can speak a thousand, right? Pictures speak 1,000 words. So you can try to do it that way, where even deteriorating skills, maybe regression in skills, you can document by video perhaps, or, just reporting what you see is important to show the deterioration in skills or that they're not making progress.
I've also had a couple of situations where the work was either sent home or was available through whatever platform they were using. And when the parent tried to work with the student, they saw that the student wasn't capable of doing it. So even the student that was paying attention and was not having behaviors, but the work was so much higher than what they can do, which in a couple of situations, we suspected that where the districts were saying at very recent IEPs that's going great, he can do that. Oh yes, he learned pronouns. And the parents were saying, well, no, he's not using them in the real world. And then when that work came home and they went to obviously work on an exercise that involved that skill, it was now documentation that the child hadn't made progress before COVID situation came up. So we're expecting when this is all behind us that we're going to have some information that we may not have had because the parents are not really, the materials weren't shared with the parents in typical times, and now they're seeing the work, and it's really it's now showing that what the parents been reporting was actually accurate. Okay.
I would actually just add quickly, you might reach out to the behaviorist if you have a good behaviorist that's working with your child at the school that knows your child and you need help and things aren't going well. Take a video and the behavior and ask for advice and help. I mean, this is a situation that they have relevant experience for, and they may be able to offer you some guidance. So it documents, but it also is, on the positive note, another person to try to help you, maybe work out a behavior plan that you're able to somewhat deliver at home to help things at home during this period of time.
Okay. Just remind everyone, we do have some time for a couple more questions if people want to post a few more. One of the issues that come up is about how families would find out about the availability of residential programs. So that is, the availability of a residential program is rarely raised by a school district. As you can imagine, the costs are significantly more than it would be, particularly if a student's attending a public school. Some that have one-on-one and a number of behavioral supports can be as, several $100,000. There's several that on the East Coast are as high as $350,000. So obviously school district is generally not going to come forward with that recommendation. So we found a couple of different avenues. One is that parents that they've gone to conferences and at the info tables have encountered programs that they weren't aware of that offered schools on a campus setting that was 24/7 support and instruction, not only in the school, but also in the more natural setting. So instead of just teaching, a group cooking skill, they actually would be doing it, in the home that they're living. So that's one way that families have found some residential programs was through those, I would call them the info tables. Another way is also that there is a profession referred to as educational consultants, that the good ones are really invaluable resources. There is an expense, so it's not accessible to everyone, but the few that we work with, particularly the really strong ones, that they will evaluate the child, be able to look at their current placement, then essentially delineate, well, this is what this child needs, 1, 2, 3, 4. When they identify a place that has that 1, 2, 3, 4, which might be perhaps a generalization program that if they learn it in this setting, they're going to learn it in the home setting, that behavior reduction occurs not only in school, but also in the home or even in the community. The very good ones will actually not only be familiar with them, but will actually follow up with the students once they place. So we've worked with a couple that actually do spend a good part of their year going around to the various programs, following up on the students that they help place there and keeping themselves familiar with it. So that's the two ways that we've seen that families have learned about residential settings. I don't know if Denise or Judy, if you've had other experiences on how families would learn about what residential programs there are.
Like what you
right?
said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And don't forget parent to parent, word of mouth also. Okay, let me see. All right, we have some more time. I think I hit the questions. Let's go back a little bit to the waivers, because that just, your signal was a little bit in and out there, Denise. On the waiver issue, what's been surprising to me is not just with waivers, but across the board, just a great variety that we're seeing, that in both either what the school district, or in some cases private schools or out of district placements, that there are some that are doing very, very little, and there's some that are almost creating a full day. I mean, it's really remarkable. I was at an IEP meeting last week, obviously remotely, and just absolutely found it remarkable what that particular private school is doing. So we see a lot of variety there, but also in the waivers too. So in New Jersey, we have local control. So the school districts are essentially that child's study team, as opposed to a region is who makes the recommendation. And I think we have something like over 300 school districts. Right. So each one of them will have their own council, not 300. It's probably about 10 or 12 that represent about all of them. But so amongst them, we just have seen just how quickly they started with remote instruction, what they're asking of the parents to sign before they'll give the remote instruction. There's really not any uniformity. So I think that in your states, if you have not-for-profits like an education law center, or in some circumstances, law schools will have education clinics. We actually have one at Rutgers here in New Jersey. And those are good places to reach out for if you don't have access to private counsel or an advocate, in order to look at those waivers, because it's just, the variety is somewhat, it's just been remarkable to me how what a wide gap it's been in terms of the services they offered. And then when they're offering the services, what they're expecting of the parent.
We've also here in New Jersey, we've asked the Department of Education to step in with some guidance here, because it's all over the map, and they should make it uniform and give the opinion, at least of the Department of Ed, of what's required or allowed even.
Right, and that actually was a really good example of effective advocacy, because we did, as Denise had mentioned, we did actually have a law on the books in New Jersey that said you could not deliver related services like speech or PT or OT remotely. And through the work of the Education Law Center and a number of the firms that represent parents, there was really pressure brought, and they did actually change the law. And surprisingly, we've found in this whole COVID situation that at least in New Jersey, I'm hoping it's the same in other states, that the governor's office has been pretty responsive when we're pointing out problems. They don't always think of our population at the get-go, but we've found that when we do point it out and how it's a barrier for the person not only getting services or staying safe, that they've actually been willing to work with the advocates. So that was actually turned around pretty quickly, even though there were some districts before that change that were giving it remotely. I know one counsel for a district had said to me that they told them get it going right away because they knew that when they came back, it would possibly take them years on it, trying to catch up on the compensatory claims, where others didn't do anything until it was actually ordered. So we have varying degrees of responsiveness on that. But that was a really good example, I think, of groups working together to get something changed.
I also wanted to mention that in addition to the districts being the difference between the districts and what they're implementing, it's also dependent upon the professional associations and individual professionals of what they are able to provide through remote instruction. So, for example, the occupational therapist, physical therapists, speech and language therapists, all those therapies, to some degree, in different circumstances, can provide certain services, and it really is specific to the individual student and their needs and their IEPs, and whether those services can be effective through remote instruction rather than in person. So there's a lot of variables, there's a lot of moving parts sometimes in trying to figure out what services which professionals are able to provide those services, and finding a professional to provide those services through remote instruction.
Right, I think particularly in the area of PTs, so it seemed that there was a lot of PTs that were uncomfortable with just sort of through a computer giving an instruction, because sometimes hands-on is so important there. And I do know that early on there was some discussion in the ABA community whether or not BCBAs could be providing services remotely, and it appears that has been worked out, particularly for parent training, or in situations where they're actually through a platform watching the parent work with the student. So we're seeing more and more of that. In New Jersey, because obviously we are, one of the real hot spots, particularly northern New Jersey, that in the beginning people were still getting, particularly through the insurance-funded programs, instructors to come to the home, but that really obviously has dropped out, although I do believe that they would be considered as an essential service and essential worker, and they could. They're just obviously people that just were uncomfortable with doing that. So unfortunately, that service has, for the most part, dropped out and is very difficult to do remotely. So we are just trying to support people to keep, in some circumstances, keep everyone safe. I don't know if anyone that's listening now also heard the very first webinar that we did. And I think it was really sage advice from Lee Wachtel from Kennedy Krieger at Hopkins, who, in response to a parent question that, I'm feeling guilty, they're not learning anything, and, just trying to hold things together. And her response was, the goal is to keep everyone safe, even if it takes 3 bags of Cheetos. And I could not, there's nothing, I can fully agree with that advice. They're very difficult, challenging times. We just have a couple minutes left, and I think we did hit our questions. I don't know, Denise or Judy, any interesting tidbit we might have for people out there that are struggling through, everyone uses the word unprecedented. I actually prefer unimaginable, which in our practice is sort of surprising. Okay, someone just sent me a question that there's only half the question. So hold on, can you see this? Oh, yeah, unfortunately okay. How do I ask if they're monitoring or actually working on the IEP goals? Well, obviously they should, even if the instructor's remote, they should be keeping data, and you certainly could ask for that. How are they measuring progress? I think it's definitely become less formal than it has been in the actual school placements, but I think that is a very relevant question to ask either through the case manager, or if you're lucky enough to be able to have direct contact with the instructor or the related service provider. That I think that's really an important question to ask. How are they doing this time? So I don't know if you can help me.
It also goes into doing your own monitoring to the degree possible, because at the end of the day, whether a child received services and made progress, if you have data showing that they didn't and they didn't take data, it's not good for them as far as that, they're going to have to show something to show that they were working towards and that the child was achieving these goals. If they haven't taken data, if I was their attorney, I would be telling them, take data, because they need to always take data to show that they're providing the services in the appropriate manner. So I think that's also, we're going to find variation in that, but I certainly think that it's something they should be doing as far as making sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing for the child in their IEP.
Right. Okay, we had a couple of questions jump up here. One person says they don't have an IEP. So if you had not yet been referred to your child study team in order to get an IEP in place, you should know that COVID-19 has not stopped that process. That still is in place. So you can reach out to your child study team within your school district and ask for an initial referral. They do have to do that. That process remains in effect. It may be a little different because some assessments are difficult to do without direct contact. And I've seen districts do things including accept parents' evaluations as well. So if you don't have an IEP, don't think that you have to wait until schools open up again, because that obligation is still there. That child find obligation is still there. There's a couple of questions here about
Lisa, I just want to add, let me just add in quickly that you should write an email to the director of special education in your district requesting that directly and asking who, if not that person, who's the person who's going to take care of that for you. But definitely put it in writing, and it should be directed at the special education department.
Right, that you're making.
Say you want to refer your child. Sorry, that you want to refer your child to special education because that you feel that they may need an IEP.
Right, exactly. So you actually are asking for a referral and evaluation to really examine the question of whether or not the child is a student with a disability in need of an IEP. So again, that is still going on. Someone wants to know, what do we do until we get an IEP? Well, as I said, some of the other resources that we used to have, like insurance funded placements, the challenge we're having is finding the personnel to implement that. So my recommendation is to move on that. There is a period of time where they do have time in order to evaluate, determine eligibility, and offer services. Some districts will move quicker than that timeline. Someone writes about questions about resources for home-based instruction. I think, as a National Council, we keep our eyes out for that type of information. And again, like us on Facebook, we post as we come across things. It has been frustrating because a lot of the resources are just not all that helpful. I mean, a video on the science experiment for a child that won't sit still is not going to really work. A free boxing class is not a good idea either. So we've seen some of those type of things come along. Someone writes too that they have full-time ABA and they want a homeschool program. So if you're looking for it to be funded through the school district, then you would have to go through the process of getting evaluated, determined eligible, and then we have in many cases actually worked out a home program as an actual placement for a student, though it may vary state to state. But we do have some children that are on home instruction, particularly the younger kids from like 3 to 6. We often see that. And we have a number of home-based providers that are actually been recognized by the New Jersey Department of Education. So it is considered an appropriate and a fundable placement.
I would also just add that with ABA being allowed to be provided through telehealth, that if you have ABA health services in your insurance, in your health insurance, you can look into providers that are doing telehealth during, this time of home distance learning.
Someone just posted a great resource, which we'll make sure that we share. It says the Southeastern University Center for Autism and Related Disabilities has put together a list of resources for parents and teachers and adults that should be helpful to many ASD. It's continually updated, and you can find it at their link, which we'll post for you on Facebook. So that's a great resource. I guess we'll sort of end with one of the parents' sort of questions of comments, that the sense that through these times that you often feel like you're drowning. And I just want to recognize that, I'm a parent of a severely autistic, no longer a student, an adult that has, the full whammy of limited language, very severe, dangerous behaviors and cognitive impairment. And it was difficult to get help and services in normal times. And in many cases, it does feel insurmountable. So I think, know that we're here, and we certainly are trying at the National Council to Severe to share as many resources as we can to help us get through these times, and also to make sure that when there's legislation or policies, that they're always remembering, our loved ones, because they're often forgotten. And we just pledge to you that we are committed to it and staying on top of it. And as you come across issues that appear that this population their issues are not being addressed, please bring it to our attention, which you can do through the website or the Facebook page. Okay, I think that I got all the questions. Yes. And I can read that link to you. It's a little odd. It's LINKTR and then .ee / and then all in caps UMNSUCARD. That sounds like a good resource for some perhaps home instruction materials or activities. Okay, so we went a little bit over. We hope this is helpful, and please remember that you're not alone. And as best we can, let's all stay connected through these very difficult times, and make sure that our loved ones are included in all the decisions and discussions going forward. Okay, thank you to the presenters, and thank you to Jill, our fearless leader that makes everything possible at the council. Okay, all right, thank you all. Bye-bye.